The planet Thesura was dying. From the tall windows of her crumbling palace, Princess Lyra Velkari watched the horizon burn with a sickly orange glow. The Devourer's swarm had consumed another city during the night. She could see the dark mass, moving across the distant mountains like a living shadow, eating everything in its path. Lyra was 23 years old. Her skin was pale blue, and her eyes were large and silver, like all Velkari people. She had been beautiful once, or so her mother had told her. She was thin and tired, with dark circles under her eyes from weeks without proper sleep. Her long white hair hung loose around her shoulders because she no longer had servants to braid it. The palace had been full of life 2 years ago. Thousands of staff had worked within its walls. Musicians had played in the great hall. Children had run through the gardens. Now the halls were empty and silent. The gardens were dead. The musicians had fled or been consumed by the swarm. Her father had died defending the northern territories 6 months ago. He had led the last of the royal guard into battle against the Devourers, knowing he would not return. Her mother had survived another 3 months before the spore sickness took her. The disease came from the Devourers, carried on the wind from the regions they had consumed. It filled the lungs with tiny parasites that slowly ate a person from the inside. Lyra had watched her mother die over the course of 12 days. There had been nothing anyone could do. Now, she was the last of her family. It's the last of a royal line that stretched back 10,000 years. And she was watching her entire world end. She turned away from the window and walked to the communication center at the heart of the palace. The equipment here was old, but functional. For the past 47 days, she had used it to send distress signals across the galaxy. She had contacted every major power in the Galactic Concord. She had begged for help from species her people had traded with for centuries. The responses had all been the same. Ambassador Zethrix of the Turellian Empire had sent a long message filled with sympathy and regret. His words had been carefully chosen and completely empty. The Turellians were afraid. They had seen what the Devourers could do. They would not risk drawing the swarm's attention to their own systems. The Cynthian Collective had responded with calculations. They had analyzed the situation and determined that intervention had a less than 12% chance of success. The Cynthians did not take actions with such low probability of positive outcomes. The Roxian Federation had cited ancient treaties. They claimed that their laws prevented them from involving themselves in extinctional-level events beyond their borders. Lyra suspected the real reason was simpler. The Roxians were cowards. One by one, every major power in the galaxy had found reasons to say no. They expressed sorrow for her people. They wished her well. They stayed safely within their own borders while the Velkari died. Lyra sat down at the communication console and began recording another message. She did not know why she bothered anymore. Perhaps it was simply because giving up felt worse than false hope. "This is Princess Lyra Velkari of Thesura," she said, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Our world is being consumed by the Devourer swarm. We have less than 2 million survivors gathered in our last shielded city. Our defenses will not hold much longer. We are asking for any assistance the galactic community can provide. Please. We cannot survive alone." She transmitted the message on every frequency she could reach. Then she sat back and waited for the silence that always followed. The silence lasted for 3 hours. Lyra had almost fallen asleep at the console when a new signal appeared on her display. It was weak and poorly focused, transmitted on radio waves rather than the quantum bursts that most advanced species used. The technology was primitive by galactic standards. The signal came from the outer spiral arm of the galaxy. Lyra had to search her database to identify the region. It was an area the Concord considered undeveloped. The species there had only recently achieved interstellar travel. The message was audio only. Without the holographic components that Concord transmissions typically included, a male voice spoke, in a language her translation systems had to work hard to process. "This is Captain Daniel Reyes of the Earth vessel Horizon's Edge. We received your distress call. We are located in the outer spiral arm, approximately 3 weeks away at maximum speed." "We're coming. Hold on." Lyra stared at the console. She had never heard of Earth. She had never heard of humans. The Concord databases contained only minimal information about them. They were a young species. They had achieved faster-than-light travel less than 20 years ago. Their technology was generations behind the major powers. She played the message again. The voice was calm and steady. There was no hesitation in it, no carefully worded excuses. "We are coming. Hold on." Lyra did not know what a single ship from a primitive species could do against the devourer swarm. The creatures numbered in the billions. They had consumed 17 worlds before reaching the Sura. The greatest military powers in the galaxy had deemed them unstoppable. But someone had answered. After 47 days of silence and polite refusals, someone had simply said they were coming. She opened a return channel, her hands shaking as she worked the controls. "Captain Reyes, this is Princess Lyra. I have received your message. I must warn you that the situation here is severe. The Devourer swarm has consumed most of our planet. Our military forces have been destroyed. We have no way to fight them. Coming here may mean your death." The response took several minutes to arrive, delayed by the vast distance between them. "Understood, Princess. We know the risks. We've been monitoring Concord communications about your situation for weeks. We know what the Devourers can do." There was a pause, and then the voice continued. "We're not coming because we think we can definitely win. We're coming because you asked for help and nobody else is answering. That's enough for us." Lyra felt tears forming in her eyes. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed by the display of emotion, even though no one was watching. "Why?" she asked. "You do not know us. You have no treaties with my people. You gain nothing from this." The answer came back across the stars, simple and direct. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because if our positions were reversed, we'd want someone to come for us. Because we're human, and this is what humans do." Lyra did not fully understand what that meant, but she understood enough. Someone was coming. For the first time in months, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. She began preparing the last city for the arrival of allies she had never met. From a world she had never heard of, who were willing to cross the galaxy to help strangers. She did not know if they could save her people, but they were willing to try. And that was more than anyone else had offered. Daniel Reyes was 41 years old. His hair was dark with streaks of gray at the temples. His hands were rough from years of manual work, and scars covered his forearms from an engine fire aboard his first command. He was not a military man. He was a merchant captain who hauled cargo between Earth's small colonies and the few alien trading posts willing to deal with humanity. Humans were new to the galaxy. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel. 18 years ago, when a scientist named Clara Webb had stumbled upon the principles almost by accident. Since then, humanity had spread to a handful of nearby star systems. They had established colonies on 6 worlds and built a fleet of civilian vessels to connect them. The Galactic Concord tolerated humans. They traded with them occasionally, but they did not take them seriously. Humanity's entire interstellar fleet numbered less than 200 ships. Most of those were cargo haulers, mining vessels, and research craft. True warships were rare. Humanity had never fought a war in space. When the distress signal from Basura reached Earth's monitoring stations, the Concord ambassadors advised against any response. "The Devourers are beyond your capability," the Turellian ambassador had warned. "You would be throwing away lives for no purpose. Your species is too young, too weak. Stay out of matters that do not concern you." Daniel had listened to that message in his cabin aboard the Horizon's Edge. He had replayed it several times. Then he had played the distress signal from Princess Lyra, listening to the fear and exhaustion in her voice. He made his decision within the hour. The call went out across Earth's colonial network. Daniel explained the situation honestly, told them about the Devourers and what they had done to 17 worlds, told them about the Velkari people, and how the entire galaxy had abandoned them. He told them that the mission would be dangerous, that many who went might not come back. He asked for volunteers anyway. The response surprised everyone. Within 3 days, ships began arriving at Earth's orbital station from every colony in human space. They were not warships. They were cargo freighters and mining vessels, survey ships, and passenger transports. Their crews were not soldiers. They were traders, engineers, scientists, and ordinary workers who had heard the call and decided to answer. Katie Morrison was 29 years old. She served as a lieutenant commander on a patrol cutter that guarded mining operations in the asteroid belt. She had never commanded anything larger than a 50-person crew. She had never been in actual combat, but she was the best tactical officer available, so she volunteered to coordinate the fleet's operations. Samuel Drake was 62 years old and supposedly retired. He had spent 40 years as a ship engineer before settling into a quiet workshop on Luna, where he repaired small craft and built custom components for hobbyists. When he heard about the mission, he packed his tools and caught the next transport to Earth orbit. He would oversee the modifications needed to give the fleet any chance of survival. Dr. Priya Sharma was a xenobiologist. She had spent her career studying alien life forms, mostly from samples and recordings rather than direct contact. She had never seen combat and had no military training, but she understood alien biology better than anyone else available. She brought her entire research team to study the Devourers and look for weaknesses. The fleet assembled over 2 weeks, 37 vessels in total. Daniel organized them as best he could, grouping them by capability and assigning roles based on their original purposes. Mining ships became bombers, their drilling equipment modified to deliver explosive charges. Cargo freighters became troop transports, their holds converted to carry rescue teams. Survey vessels became scouts, their sensors adapted to track devourer movements. The largest ship was a converted freighter named Steadfast. Its captain was a woman named Grace Chen, 53 years old with a calm demeanor and decades of experience hauling cargo through dangerous space. Samuel Drake spent 3 days installing weapons stripped from decommissioned military craft, turning the slow cargo ship into something that might survive a fight. None of it was enough. Everyone knew it. The Devourers had destroyed fleets far more powerful than anything humanity could assemble. The technology gap between humans and the major Concord powers was vast, and even those powers had failed against the swarm. But 843 humans volunteered anyway. Daniel gathered them all for a final address before departure. Their faces filled the screens across 37 ships, watching and waiting. "I'm not going to lie to you," he said. "The Concord thinks we can't win. Their analysts say we'll fail. Maybe they're right. But there's a young woman on a dying world who asked for help, and nobody else is answering. That's why we're here. That's why we're going." He paused, looking at the faces of farmers and engineers, doctors and mechanics, people who had never trained for war but had come anyway. Might not save them all. We might not save any of them. But we're going to try, because that's what we do. We help people. Even when it's hard. Even when it seems impossible. That's what makes us human. The fleet launched on a Tuesday morning. Daniel watched through his viewport as Earth shrank behind them, a small blue dot against the endless black. He did not know if he would ever see it again. The journey took 3 weeks at maximum speed. The ships traveled together, their drives straining to keep pace with each other. Samuel Drake moved between vessels constantly, fixing problems and making improvements wherever he could. Katie Morrison ran simulations and drills, trying to turn a collection of civilian ships into something resembling a coordinated force. They dropped out of faster than light at the edge of the Thesaurus system. The sight that greeted them made several crew members cry. The planet was wrapped in darkness. Billions of devourer organisms covered its surface like a living shroud, consuming everything they touched. Cities that had stood for millennia were gone. Forests and oceans had been replaced by the gray mass of the swarm. Daniel stared at the display for a long moment. Then he opened the communication channel. "Princess Lyra, this is Captain Reyes. We're here. Tell us where you need us." The reply came quickly, filled with disbelief and hope. "You actually came. You really came. You said we would," Daniel replied. "Now let's figure out how to save your people." Lyra had expected warships. She had imagined sleek military vessels with powerful weapons and advanced shields. What she saw instead was a collection of battered civilian craft held together with welds and patches. The ships looked tired and old, their hulls marked with scratches and repairs from years of hard use. For a moment, despair almost overwhelmed her. These were the saviors who had crossed the galaxy. These worn-out freighters and mining ships, How could they possibly fight the Devourers? Then she looked closer and saw what the humans had done. Weapons had been mounted on cargo bays. Shield generators salvaged from multiple sources covered vital areas. The ships had been rebuilt for war by people who had nothing designed for combat but had refused to let that stop them. They had come with everything they had. It was not much by galactic standards, but they had come. Your shields won't hold against the spore clouds, Lyra transmitted. The Devourers release airborne parasites that can dissolve standard hull plating within minutes. Daniel's response came immediately. Then we'll find a way around that. What about your people? How many can we evacuate? Evacuation. The word struck Lyra like a physical blow. Every response from the Concord had focused on the military impossibility of saving the Shura. No one had simply asked how many lives could be removed from the planet. We have transport capacity for perhaps 300,000, she said. But landing would expose your ships directly to the swarm. The moment you enter the atmosphere, they will attack. She heard Daniel speaking to someone else on his ship, the words muffled but urgent. Then his engineer's voice came over the channel, an older man with a gruff tone. I've been thinking about that, Samuel Drake said. An overloading faster-than-light drive creates a powerful electromagnetic field. If we push the field outward instead of inward, it might create a bubble of protection against organic matter. The Devourers are biological. The field should repel them. Has this been tested? Lyra asked. No. In the process, we'll burn out the drive permanently. Any ship that does this won't be able to leave the system afterward. There was silence on the channel. Lyra understood what they were considering. They would sacrifice their ship's ability to return home just for a chance to land safely. We'll need 12 ships to create enough protected corridors for the evacuation, Katie Morrison said. Her voice was steady, despite what she was proposing. Volunteers only. Everyone needs to understand what this means. 14 ships volunteered within the hour. The descent began at dawn by the Sura's time. Lyra watched from her palace as human vessels dropped through the atmosphere, their drives overloading in controlled bursts. Electromagnetic fields expanded around them, pushing back the swarm that rose to meet them. The Devourers attacked in numbers beyond counting. Billions of organisms threw themselves against the protective barriers. The sky turned dark with their bodies. But the fields held, creating tunnels of clear space through the living storm. Cargo ships descended through the corridors, their hatches opening as they touched down on the outskirts of the last Velkari city. Human crews poured out, wearing environmental suits against the spore-heavy atmosphere. They ran through streets filled with panicked refugees, guiding them toward the ships. Lyra left her palace and joined the evacuation. She would not sit safely inside while her people fled and strangers risked their lives to save them. She helped organize the crowds, directing families toward the nearest landing zones. A human woman approached her, suit already showing signs of degradation from the spores. "You're the princess," she said through her helmet speaker. "I'm Katie Morrison. Captain Reyes is coordinating from orbit. He sent me to help on the ground." "Should be on your ship," Lyra said. "Your suit is failing." Katie looked down at the spreading stains on her environmental suit. The parasites were eating through the material slowly but steadily. "I noticed. Doesn't matter. We need to move faster. How many more can we get to the ships before the corridors collapse?" By the end of the first day, 200,000 Velkari had been lifted to orbit. 3 human ships had been lost when their drives failed during descent. 47 humans had died when their suits failed completely. The bodies could not be recovered. Daniel refused to stop. "We can get more," he said over the communication channel. "We can save more. Send the next wave down." Dr. Priya Sharma had not slept since arriving in the system. She had spent every moment studying captured devourer specimens, analyzing their biology, searching for any weakness that could be exploited. The creatures were remarkably simple despite their devastating effectiveness. They consumed organic matter and reproduced rapidly. They had no individual intelligence, but they worked together with perfect coordination. Billions of organisms moved as a single entity, responding instantly to threats. Concentrating their attacks on the most dangerous targets, something was controlling them. On the second day, Priya found it. They're a hive mind, she announced to the fleet commanders. Connected through a specific pheromone frequency, there's a central nexus somewhere on the planet that broadcasts the signal. Every devourer organism receives instructions from it constantly. If we disrupt that frequency, they'll lose coordination. What happens if they lose coordination? Daniel asked. They become individuals. Without the hive mind guiding them, they won't know what to do. They might continue eating whatever is nearby, but they won't be able to organize attacks or respond to threats. The swarm becomes just a collection of simple organisms. Hope surged through the fleet. For the first time, they had something other than desperate evacuation. How do we disrupt the signal? Katie asked. Priya's expression grew serious. The disruption needs to be broadcast from close range. Within the core of the swarm, someone would have to fly directly into the densest concentration of devourers and activate a modified transmitter. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Everyone knew what such a mission meant. The transmitter would need to be active for at least 30 seconds to fully disrupt the frequency, Priya continued. During that time, the ship would be completely surrounded by the swarm. Even with the best shields we have, survival would be unlikely. Daniel nodded slowly. But if it works, the devourers stop. The evacuation can continue without interference. Maybe even more than that. Maybe we could actually save the planet. He stood up from his command chair. I'll fly it. Katie immediately objected. You're the fleet commander. We need you coordinating operations. I'm also the best pilot we have for close quarters maneuvering, Daniel replied. This needs precision, flying through a swarm of billions of organisms. That's what I've spent my career doing in asteroid fields. Minus the billions of organisms. The argument that followed lasted through the night. But Daniel had made his decision. No one could change his mind. He was going into the heart of the swarm. The shuttle was called Little Bear. It was the smallest vessel in the fleet. Originally designed for surveying mineral deposits and asteroid belts, the craft was fast and nimble, built for threading through debris fields where larger ships could not go. Samuel Drake had spent 6 hours modifying it, installing the transmitter Priya had designed, and adding every piece of protective equipment he could find. When he finished, he looked at Daniel with tired eyes. It's not enough, he admitted. The shields will last maybe 3 minutes under heavy assault. The hull can take another 2 minutes after that before complete failure. You need to be in and out in 5 minutes, or you're not coming back. Daniel nodded. I understand. No, you don't. Samuel's voice was rough with emotion. I've been an engineer for 40 years. I've built things my whole life. This is the first time I've built something knowing it was probably going to become a coffin. Daniel put a hand on the old man's shoulder. Then make sure it's a good coffin. One that gets the job done before it fails. The argument about who would fly the mission had continued through the night. Daniel had insisted he would go alone. Katie had demanded to take his place. Other volunteers had stepped forward, each claiming they had skills that made them the better choice. Then Lyra had appeared in the shuttle bay, and everything changed. I will fly with you, she said. Daniel shook his head immediately. Absolutely not. Your people need their princess. You have to survive to lead them. My people need their world, Lyra replied. If this mission fails, there will be nothing left to lead. The evacuation can save some of us, but without the planet, my species will become refugees scattered across the galaxy. We will lose everything that makes us who we are. She stepped closer, her silver eyes meeting his. You came here to help strangers? You crossed the galaxy because you believed it was right. Let me do the same for my own people. Let me prove that the Velkari are worth what you have sacrificed. The debate that followed involved representatives from every ship in the fleet. Voices argued back and forth for hours. Finally, a compromise was reached. Daniel would pilot. His experience navigating asteroid fields and debris zones made him the best choice for the approach through the swarm. Lyra would operate the transmitter and use her knowledge of the planet's terrain to guide them to the hive mind's nexus. Katie would coordinate from orbit, directing the fleet's covering fire to clear a path. They boarded Little Bear at dawn on the 3rd day of the battle. The shuttle was cramped, barely large enough for 2 people and the equipment they carried. Daniel took the pilot's seat while Lyra strapped in beside the transmitter controls. "You know this might not work," Daniel said as he ran through the pre-flight checks. "I know," Lyra replied. "But you came here knowing the same thing. Now I understand why. Some things are worth risking everything for." The fleet formed a protective formation around them as they began their descent. Every ship capable of carrying weapons took position, ready to create a corridor through the swarm. The Steadfast led the formation. Grace Chen's calm voice, coordinating the attack runs. The Devourers rose to meet them. The creatures came in numbers that defied comprehension. They blackened the sky, their bodies blocking out the sun. Each organism was small, barely larger than a human hand. But together they formed a mass that could strip a ship to its frame in minutes. Covering fire erupted from the fleet. Explosions tore through the swarm, creating momentary gaps that filled almost instantly. Missiles and energy weapons cleared paths that lasted seconds at most. But seconds were enough. Little Bear dove through the chaos. Daniel flew with a skill born from 15 years of navigating dangerous space. He threaded the shuttle through gaps in the swarm using the temporary corridors created by the fleet's weapons. The ship twisted and rolled, dodging clusters of organisms that threw themselves at the hull. Lyra watched the shields drop with each impact. 70%. 60. 50. "We're still 3 minutes from the Nexus," she said. "I know." Daniel's hands moved across the controls without hesitation. "We'll make it." The core of the swarm was located at the center of the largest Devourer concentration on the planet. It was a biological structure that had grown from the first organisms to land on the Sura, a massive organic tower that served as the hive mind's broadcasting center. Every Devourer on the planet received its instructions from that single point. As they approached, the attacks intensified. The creatures seemed to sense the threat, throwing themselves at Little Bear with suicidal determination. The shuttle's shields flickered and sparked under the assault. "Shields at 30%, Lyra reported. "We won't make it at this rate." Daniel pushed the engines harder. The shuttle screamed through the swarm, its hull beginning to glow from the friction of countless impacts. Warning alarms filled the cabin. 20%. The Nexus appeared ahead, a twisted spire of organic matter rising from the consumed landscape. It pulsed with a sickly light, the rhythm matching the movements of the swarm around them. 10%. "Almost there," Daniel said through gritted teeth. The shields failed at 100 meters from the target. Devourer organisms began striking the hull directly. The sound was horrifying, like hail on a metal roof multiplied 1,000 times. Breach warnings flashed across every display. Daniel kept flying. The hull began to crack at 50 meters. Tiny organisms forced their way through the seams, their bodies dissolving as they tried to consume the shuttle from inside. Lyra activated the transmitter at 40 meters. With the shuttle coming apart around them, the signal pulsed outward. It was a frequency designed to interfere with the pheromone communication of the hive mind. Priya had calculated it precisely, matching the exact wavelength that connected every Svara to the Nexus. The effect was immediate. Every organism attacking the shuttle stopped moving. They fell away from the hull like rain, their bodies suddenly purposeless. The swarm that had filled the sky began to disperse. Billions of creatures losing their connection to the intelligence that had guided them. But the shuttle was still falling. The engines had failed. The hull was compromised in a dozen places. They were dropping toward the planet's surface with no way to slow down. "Katie," Daniel transmitted, his voice strained. "We need extraction. Right now." 3 ships broke formation and dove toward the falling shuttle. The Steadfast reached them first, its cargo bay doors opening wide. Grace Chen matched their descent with impossible precision, bringing the massive freighter alongside the tumbling Little Bear. "I can't land us in the bay," Daniel said. "Controls are gone. Then I'll catch you," Grace replied. "Hold on." The Steadfast adjusted its position, placing its open cargo bay directly in the shuttle's path. Daniel and Lyra braced themselves as Little Bear crashed into the freighter, sliding across the deck and slamming into the back wall with enough force to throw them both from their seats. Emergency teams rushed in before the echoes faded. They pulled Daniel and Lyra from the wreckage, checking for injuries and loading them onto medical stretchers. Daniel had 2 broken ribs and a concussion. Lyra had a fractured arm and burns across her shoulders from the console that had exploded beside her. They were alive. Through the viewport of the medical bay, they watched as the last devourer organisms on the Sura died. Without the hive mind to guide them, the creatures simply stopped functioning. Their bodies began to break down almost immediately, decomposing into organic matter that the planet could reclaim. The swarm that had consumed 17 worlds was finished. Katie's voice came over the communication system, breaking with emotion. It worked. By God, it worked. The Sura is clear. The Devourers are dead. You did it. Daniel looked at Lyra, lying on the stretcher beside him. She was crying, tears streaming down her blue cheeks as she stared at the viewport. We did it, she whispered. We actually did it.
Ow!
The news spread across the galaxy within days. The Devourers, the unstoppable swarm that had consumed 17 worlds and terrified every major Power in the Concord, had been defeated. Not by the great military fleets of the Tyrellian Empire, not by the advanced technology of the Cynthian Collective, not by any of the species that had watched from safety while the Velkari begged for help. The swarm had been stopped by humans. A young species with primitive technology and a handful of civilian ships, a people who had been traveling between stars for less than 2 decades. Ambassador. Zethrix of the Tyrellian Empire read through the reports with something approaching disbelief. The casualty lists made no sense to him. 93 humans had died in the battle. 7 ships had been destroyed. An entire fleet had sacrificed their faster-than-light drives to create landing corridors for evacuation. They had given up their ability to return home just to save strangers. The Galactic Concord called an emergency session to discuss what had happened. Representatives from 47 species gathered in the Great Assembly Hall, a structure that had witnessed treaties and declarations for 10,000 years. The human representative was invited to speak. Dr. Linda Hayes was 70 years old. Her hair was white, and her face was lined with age, but her eyes were sharp and clear. She had been a diplomat for 4 decades, presenting humanity to species that often looked down on her people as primitive newcomers. She had learned that simple words often carried more weight than elaborate speeches. Zethrix was the first to address her. We must understand, he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. Why did your species do this? You gained nothing from this action. You risked everything. Your analysts predicted failure. Your ships were outmatched. By every measure, your intervention should not have succeeded. Linda stood before the assembly and took a moment to look around the room. Representatives of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy looked back at her, waiting for an explanation that made sense. Because someone asked for help, she said, and we could try to give it. The chamber fell silent. Your calculations showed you could not win, Zethrix pressed. Your own people must have known the odds. They did. Linda agreed. Captain Reyes told every volunteer exactly what they were facing. He was honest about the risks. He told them they might not come back, and they came anyway. She paused, letting the words settle. A retired engineer came out of his workshop because he couldn't stand by while people died. A young officer took command of a tactical operation despite never having seen combat because she believed she could help. A scientist worked without sleep until she found a weakness in an enemy everyone thought was unstoppable. A merchant captain flew into certain death because he believed someone had to. She stepped forward, addressing not just Zethrix but every representative in the chamber. You want to know what makes humans different? We know we might lose. We know the odds might be against us. We understand the calculations as well as anyone. But sometimes the right thing and the smart thing aren't the same. And when that happens, we choose to do what's right, even if it seems foolish. The Cynthian representative, a being of pure logic and calculation, spoke for the first time. This is not rational behavior. Resources should be preserved for situations with higher probability of success. Linda shook her head. Maybe not. But rationality isn't everything. Sometimes you have to be willing to fail at doing something meaningful rather than succeed at doing nothing. She looked around the chamber one final time. We came to thee, Sura, because a young woman's voice reached us across the stars, asking for help that no one else would give. We came because we believe that every life has value, even lives we've never met. We came because that's what we hoped someone would do for us. The Concord had no response. In the months that followed, humanity became something new in galactic society. They were still not powerful. Their technology remained generations behind the major species. Their fleet was smaller and weaker than any other spacefaring civilization. But they were trusted in a way that the ancient powers were not. When the surviving Valkyrie established a new colony, human engineers helped build it. They worked alongside the blue-skinned refugees, constructing homes and infrastructure without asking for payment or resources in return. When other species faced crises, they began to notice human vessels appearing at the edge of their systems. Offering assistance before anyone asked, Princess Lyra eventually visited Earth. She walked through cities filled with people who had never met a Valkyrie, who could not pronounce her name correctly, who had nothing to gain from helping her world. They welcomed her anyway. She spoke at gatherings across the planet, telling the story of what had happened at the Sura. Humans listened with quiet attention, some of them crying when she described the moment when Little Bear had crashed into the Steadfast's cargo bay before the humans came. I thought my people were alone in a galaxy that didn't care whether we lived or died, she told an audience at a university in Chicago. I was wrong about that. We were alone in a galaxy where most species were afraid to care, afraid that helping others might cost them something, afraid that reaching out might mean losing something of their own. She paused, looking at the faces before her. The humans showed everyone that fear doesn't have to win, that compassion can be stronger than self-preservation, that hope can survive even when logic says it shouldn't. Daniel Reyes recovered from his injuries and returned to merchant shipping. His routes changed, though. He carried supplies to refugee settlements and transported relief workers to disaster zones. The Horizon's Edge became known throughout the sector as a ship that would always answer a distress call, no matter who sent it. Years later, when historians recorded the Battle of the Sura, they noted that it marked a turning point in galactic relations. The great powers began to reconsider their approach to intervention. The Concord reformed its policies on mutual aid. Species that had ignored each other for centuries started talking about cooperation, all because a young species with old ships and no military experience had crossed the galaxy to help strangers. The measure of a civilization, the historians wrote, was not found in technology or military might or economic power. It was found in whether they showed up when someone needed help. In the archives of the Valkyrie Royal Palace, a simple radio transmission remained preserved for future generations. It was displayed in a place of honor, alongside artifacts from 10,000 years of Valkyrie history. The message was short and direct. The words of a merchant captain who had decided that doing the right thing mattered, more than doing the safe thing. This is Captain Daniel Reyes. Of the Earth vessel Horizon's Edge, we received your distress call. We're coming. Hold on, that the Valkyrie taught their children for generations afterward was what it meant to be human, and across the galaxy, other species began to learn the same lesson. Help was not something to be calculated. It was not a transaction to be weighed against potential losses. Help was something you gave because someone needed it, and you could provide it. Simple as that, the humans had shown them. And slowly, one crisis at a time, the galaxy began to change.